Welcome to our American Athletic Conference faithful. We are back with another episode of the Edge of Autonomy podcast. I am Ryan Smith of Voodoo 5. As always, with me is Aman Kidwai from the Yukon blog. Aman, how you doing tonight?
Ryan, doing real well. Thanks.
And so, very interesting week or so of AAC-related headlines. We recently had American Athletic Conference Media Days, a lot of fun storylines from there, as always. And we are getting ever closer to the season. And we are kind of reaching the point where it's not hard to get yourself excited for football season, no matter how bad your team may or may not be in the next week or so. And we will probably find that out quickly. So we'll be joined later by Justin Mears, the Navy writer for Underdog Dynasty. He was at Media Days, and he will give us a little bit of insight on what he saw there. And we'll also get his opinion on Navy and their first year in the conference. But in the meantime, one of the biggest storylines that we saw from Media Days, from this whole offseason in general, one of the few bright spots in this otherwise rather dull American Conference offseason is Bob Diaco. And Bob Diaco, we all got really his kind of craziness, which I think had been confined to the Yukon fan base and very hardcore fans of some American Athletic Conference team. It kind of got exposed to the world with this civil conflict shindig, so to speak. And Media Days, he went off again, and it was probably even better than the first time. So, Aman, you want to fill us in on exactly what he said?
Yeah, so Bob Diaco, when asked about expectations for UConn in the upcoming season, very confidently stated that the Huskies would go 12-0, undefeated, and make the college football playoff and win the national championship.
Which is a very reasonable expectation.
Which is exactly what happens after you haven't won more than 3 games in a few years, and you're coming off a 2-10 season, and expectations are as low as they have ever been since UConn joined the FBS ranks. The perfectly normal thing to say for a person who invented a rivalry out of thin air earlier this offseason, and was warding off energy vampires by putting his hands over his neck in his introductory press conference when he was introduced as head coach. So, you're exactly right. Par for the course for a UConn fan, just going like, okay, we knew he was a little crazy. Civil conflict thing happens. Okay, we know he might be pretty crazy. And then, we just get this, and he's taking it to another level. So, at the very least, if we don't win any games this year, we should have some pretty fun sound bites across the season, at least. So there's something to look forward to, even if this does end up being a down season for the Huskies and the Diaco prophecy does not come true.
Now, we've got on the record as being very pro Bob Diaco as a podcast. The Edge of Autonomy podcast supports Bob Diaco in all his ventures. But for a lot of people, I'm sure that this last statement saying, UConn is going to go 12-0 this year, a year after they won one conference game, is going to ruffle some feathers, even among the fan base, saying, okay, it's good to be confident, but it's also good to be realistic, and this is just silly. How have UConn fans handled that as a whole? From an outsider perspective, I think it's awesome. I think it's really cool that he's saying that. I get a kick out of that. But I can imagine that some people don't think that.
Yeah, I mean, not to besmirch the mothership, but yeah, SBNation.com, Deadspin felt the need to really make fun of that. It's a football coach, and he's saying we're going to try to win every game, and we expect to win every game. Deep down, Bob Diaco, I think he really does believe it, is the insane part. I think the fan base, they think it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, they say, how about a bowl game? How about we make a bowl game for the first time in 5 years? before you talk about going 12-0 and winning the national championship. Again, I think going back to last year, Bob Diaco talked about UConn being in a preparation phase, which no one really knew exactly what it meant, and no one really knew when that would end. And he was talking about how the team, this is going to sound crazy, but the team wasn't game planning for opponents and stuff like that. So for him to come out and say that our approach is to win actually is a significant change from last year, where he started the season saying we're in a preparation phase. So for me, as someone who's been following the team very closely the past couple of years, just like I said, it's kind of better than this like lay down, we're not even trying to win kind of attitude that he was projecting at the start of last season. At least now it seems as though that aspect has changed, and we can, at least start to look forward to improving, as opposed to the year zero environment and experience that we hear so much about.
Here's the one question that I have about this, and it kind of applies. We've mentioned so many times about the parallels between Willie Taggart and Bob Diaco, and I hope for UConn's sake that they don't continue. But something that I picked up with Willie Taggart is that, he did a great job from his introductory press conference, from the very first day he was hired, of raising expectations and getting people excited about the program. And that's really, really valuable, especially when you're outside the Power Five and you need to find some way to get people watching games and going to games. But the problem is when you start raising expectations like that, he told us, he came in and he says in this press conference, we have a team that can get back to winning conference titles. Not that they were ever there in the first place, but, in theory. And the team wasn't even close. They went 2-10 in the first season, and there's no way that Willie Taggart could have looked at his team and said, oh, this is a team that can contend for a conference title. There's just no way. Same thing last year, marginally improved product. Now, I think more people saw last year coming, didn't feel as blindsided by it, but before the season, he's saying this is a team that's bowl or bust. If we don't make a bowl, the year's a failure. Is Bob Diaco digging his own grave, in a sense, by obviously these are meant to be taken with a grain of salt, but when you raise expectations like this on purpose, it makes it a lot easier not to hit them. Whereas you say, hey, look, this is a multi-year rebuilding project. This is going to be slow, but we're moving in the right direction. Then maybe you get people more on board with the process. Or maybe you have to get them excited some way, so talking it up is the way to go. I don't know. I don't know what you think about that either.
Yeah, I think, if there was any reason to believe what Diaco said, I'm making this up, but let's say they had ended the season, UConn ended the season on like a 3-game winning streak, and started posting really good numbers on average across that 3 games, and ended the season on a high note where even though we weren't bowl eligible or something like that, then expectations would be high, kind of regardless of what Bob Diaco, I don't think a single UConn fan changed their expectations of the team based on those comments from Bob Diaco, to kind of answer your question in a straightforward manner. And then to dive a little deeper, as I kind of intimated earlier, I don't think UConn expectations have been lower than actually that first year in what was then called Division 1A. I really don't think so, because the first couple of years in FBS actually went pretty well for us, with Dan Orlovsky, and for every year in the Randy Edsel era, we expected to go 7-5, and that was kind of the expectations for the
Understandably.
And that was kind of the expectations for the Pascaloni era too, expectations which he failed upon. But there isn't a single UConn fan who changed what they think about this upcoming season based on Diaco saying something like that. Which might be why he didn't give such a realistic and attainable sounding goal when he said that, because then when we don't meet it, you know, like you said, that's where you really get in trouble, when you don't meet whatever arbitrary expectations seem to be coming from the fan base in aggregate. I think, as we have discussed earlier, I think fans are expecting to have a tough time against Villanova. I think fans are expecting to have a tough time against Army, and those are two of the winnable games on the schedule, two of the easiest, based on preseason, whatever, and F plus rankings, F plus minus rankings from last year. Those are the two worst teams we're going to face, I think, besides USF and Tulane.
Woo.
Yeah. I could see us losing to Villanova. I could see us losing to Army, and then where are we going to find wins? So I think the expectations are already starting to build for 2016. But for now, among the UConn fan base, we're not expecting a whole lot. I don't think. I think some want Diaco to prove it in year two. I feel like those people aren't really giving him a fair shake, just given the situation that he inherited. But expectations are starting to build for 2016, to the point where if that is not, that is a bowl team or bust. It has to be. Year three has to be a bowl team, and this year, regardless of the record, does have to end on a positive note, or give some sort of juice to the fans so that they come back and buy season tickets.
Sure.
Which are at the lowest that they have been since kind of reaching a high point about 7 years ago. So
Now, if UConn does go 12-0 this year, can I get you on record saying that you will get a tattoo of Bob Diaco?
that was probably going to happen anyway. Yeah. I'll get a tattoo of Bob's face with "In Bob We Trust" written along the bottom. I'll put it on a 12-0 looking dollar bill or something like that. I'll do, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll do a Bob Diaco themed tattoo if we go 12-0. But if I was popping champagne for when that didn't happen, I might be doing that pretty early in the season.
I've never been a bigger UConn fan than I am this year now. So we've talked about Diaco, and we've discussed a little bit about what the expectations need to be for USF and UConn this year. They're both in the middle of rebuilds. UConn is in year 2, USF is in year 3, and so even though the expectations are probably around the same, they're both very low for these two teams. Bob Diaco obviously has a little more wiggle room. He's still building. Willie Taggart's got to show results. What have we seen or not seen in these fall practices that make us think, hey, there might be some way to eke out 6 wins?
Mm-hmm. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts first. Actually, how is USF gonna eke out 6 wins this year? I think they've got the talent where you could talk yourself into it. Maybe
that is the one thing that you put in the plus column. I mean, if you're making a pro and con chart, the pros is the talent level. Obviously, they're bringing in the best caliber of athlete in the conference. Debatably, I mean, it's you could argue with recruiting ratings all you like, but it's up there. And they are finally running an offense that fits that talent. Those are two things that are very, very good. Can't shake those. Those are cold, hard facts. However, pretty much everything else falls on the con side, and I mean like pretty much everything else. I think long term, the switch to the spread offense is going to be good. You get these guys running a spread offense. The longer USF runs a spread offense, the better. That's the offense they should be running. But I mean, it's really tough to have any faith in that being executed correctly when the person running it, Willie Taggart, who is the acting offensive coordinator and play caller, he has never run a spread offense before. So that's a little frightening. And all of these players were recruited to a Power I team. And all of a sudden, you just kind of pull the carpet out from under them and said, okay, we're trying something new. And so I think I was supposed to be saying positive things about the this year's team. And so I like the new the defense through fall camp so far has looked good. It's not too hard to look good against USF's offense, but they have a new scheme. The 4-2-5 favors speed, favors athleticism. They got a lot of good athletes on defense. This could be USF's first halfway decent defense in a long time. And you have a halfway decent defense in the American. I mean, you can win 4 conference games no problem, because
Yeah.
the conference is not very difficult to win in. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you're referencing the F plus ratings here, which is very helpful, although obviously you can't weigh everything on them, as Voodoo 5 readers like to tell me. But a team that's even in the 80s or 90s, which is really bad by any sort of metric, a team in the 80s or 90s has a decent shot at winning 6 games in the American. The American is just, the bottom especially, is not very good. And so USF or UConn, they don't need to be that good to win some games and make a little bit of a dent in that conference. But it's been really horrible how bad they have been and how bad they were last year. I mean, they were both deep in the 100s, 110s. I mean, that's really not going to get it done no matter what conference you're in. And so there doesn't need to be that much improvement. You know, neither of these teams needs to put out their best team in 10 or even 5 years to make a bowl game. Now, I would argue that the tangible progress is more important than making a bowl game. But, you know, as far as players and as far as, you know, the athletic department who's evaluating these coaches, they want to see them make a bowl game. And that's doable. It's very, very doable. I just haven't seen any indication that this team will show enough improvement to even clear that very, very lowered bar. And
Well, it's interesting. You know, we got to see Temple do it last year. They didn't get to play in a bowl game, but they did improve. They did improve from 2-10 to 6-6. You know, in kind of a way that people weren't expecting them to do. So the premise exists, and for what USF, they're in year 3. You know, the Memphis story also is somewhat applicable. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely possible. I mean, Temple didn't actually get to play in a bowl game last year, even though they finished 6-6. But it's definitely in the cards if some things can bounce in the right way.
absolutely, yeah. And that is, you know, again, I do have a tough time saying, oh, it's okay if they're the 85th best team in the country, but they go 6-6. I mean, that doesn't really sit well with me, but I do understand the value of going 6-6 or going 7-5 and making a bowl game, no matter how good or bad you are.
Yeah.
And that would mean a lot. And is that out of the question? No. Do I think it's out of the question that USF's going to put a good team on the field this year? Probably. I mean, it would have to be unprecedented improvement. But it's certainly a possibility that they put out a good defense. The offense does just enough. You know, they have a great running back. They have a couple decent weapons on offense. There is a possibility that the team can make a bowl. I just don't think it's likely, as we have stated ad nauseum.
Yeah.
But so flipping over to UConn, and can you, looking at that schedule, pick out 6 wins?
Pick out 6 wins? No, I can't. But I can certainly be surprised. And I think it's really pretty simple for me. If our offensive line can be, if our offensive line can be passable this year, and by passable I don't mean that we can pass a lot. I mean that it's just something that looks like an FBS quality offensive line,
Mm-hmm.
um, that makes life easier for our quarterback, whoever that may be. But if we can get better O-line play and significantly better QB play as a result, then it can happen. Our defense, UConn's defense, has always been pretty good. And that is expected to continue this year. We are returning, all of our front seven, except for like 2 rotation players, I believe, from last year. And the secondary has 2 really experienced safeties, a little inexperienced at corner, but very athletic. So these, I guess, it just is, if we can get that offensive line, if we can get the UConn offense to look good, something it hasn't done in a really long time, arguably since Dan Orlovsky left, or since the Donald Brown 2-headed rushing attack from like the 07 range. But if we can get the O-line going and better quarterback play, it can happen. Those are obviously massive ifs, and ifs that I am very unsure about, which is why, I don't feel great about it. But I can be surprised. I'm reaching that point of the year, a little under 2 weeks left in the season, where I'm like talking myself into it. I'm reading that. I'm reading that off-season puff piece from the local newspaper
Oh yeah.
during the preseason about the backup linebacker who gained 10 pounds and has really been working hard this offseason. And
It's 10 pounds of pure muscle.
it's 10 pounds of pure muscle, and nobody else has a strength and conditioning trainer like ours,
Yeah, exactly.
who the article names, and so, or in this instance with UConn, like with the offensive line. Oh my God, there's some guy in the offseason who's been lifting so hard. If the offensive line can improve, then it can make a significant difference. It can give our quarterback time to throw. It can give our running backs, which are actually a pretty talented group, time to throw. In the live play that we have seen so far of UConn, which for the media has been 1 preseason practice and 1 scrimmage, the offensive line has struggled. Oh, and the spring game. We can count the spring game too from March. The offensive line has still struggled. Now, that UConn front seven, like I said earlier, is pretty good. So maybe I can cut them some slack, but if it's anything like the offensive line from last year that could barely hold it against Stony Brook, we're going to continue to have some problems, and it's going to be massively detrimental to the team. So that's what it would take for us to sneak into 6-6 and win a bowl game, would be to lean on that defense, maybe hope it takes like a very, very large leap, and we get into some defensive slugfests, score some special teams touchdowns, and stay in close games and have a disproportionately good record in close games.
Well, there is no history of UConn ever doing that, so I think you're sunk.
Yeah, exactly.
But the good thing about this is that, sometimes, going through these podcasts with, we're talking about being left out of the Power 5 conferences. We're talking about 2 football teams that have not been good in a long time. I feel like for the first time, we are getting a little bit of sense of cautious optimism for the future. Definitely not 2015. I don't think there's too much cautious optimism for 2015. But I think that we're starting to see that, hey, maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel for both of these programs, whether it's under their current coaches or whether it's the next hire they make. For UConn, I certainly hope it's under Bob Diaco, not only because I like him, but because it's far too early into his tenure to call it one way or the other yet.
Yeah.
But it really does seem like maybe in the next few years, USF and UConn are back on the top half of the American. And the fact that I even had to say that sentence is a little bit nauseating. But seriously, I mean, I think these programs are headed in the right direction. I really believe that.
Yeah, it is tough, but I think you're hitting on an interesting point, and that is this kind of acceptance of the American Athletic Conference as not that bad of a place to be for programs in our current state, and a place where if you can win a lot, if you can be a consistent winner, if you win the American Athletic Conference, if you do even what Memphis did, which is be good in 1 year, you're back in that realignment discussion,
Absolutely.
and that's all it takes really is, we all saw it happen so rapidly. Take Louisville, for instance, joining the Big East. They made a pretty rapid climb from Conference USA to the Big East to now in the ACC, mostly because of well, we don't want to get into it really, but the fact of the matter is that if you just accept the American Conference for what it is, a slight downgrade from the old Big East, but still a place where if you can be at the top of it, you are at the top of the list when that time may come. I'm beginning to think that time may not come for a while. And so with that in mind, and just with accepting our lot in the American Athletic Conference, I mean, Bob Diaco, I know he said that UConn would go undefeated and all that stuff and blah blah blah, but in the coaches roundtable at Media Day, which I was able to watch online, he kind of said it in a different way. It wasn't about UConn, but it was just that if you go undefeated with the type of non-conference schedules that we are scheduling, and you go undefeated in the American, you are a contender for that FBS, for that college football playoff, which I think is an interesting point to bring up, because Marshall went undefeated in Conference USA, obviously a completely different conference.
Yeah.
And didn't, never even in the conversation.
Yeah, they didn't even register on the radar.
Hardly in the conversation, even for the Group of 5 PCS Bowl bid. And even Florida State. And so let's hit the other end of the spectrum with the basement of the Power 5, soon to be Power 6. Florida State went undefeated last year, the reigning national champion. And what were they? Were they the 3 in the playoff, the 3 seed? So, it's an interesting claim for Bob Diaco to make, but to just kind of wrap up this long-winded point that I'm making is that if you succeed in the American, you prove that you could succeed, or you could at least get other people to believe that you could succeed elsewhere. And I think that's important for programs in our state. Both USF and UConn have fairly young programs, and it's just one of those things where, yeah, it would be awesome to be in a power conference and all the money and the recruiting boost and the excitement that would afford to bring in those types of programs. But at the same time, we're programs that are in their teens, and some of those old guys really wanted some of those other old guys in the power conferences with them. Reality be damned. So I think a big part of it for me as a UConn fan in accepting where things are is really feeling as though UConn football can get where it needs to get in the American Athletic Conference, which I think some people previously didn't believe or previously thought would be significantly hampered. And honestly, UConn has been terrible by their own right, not really from anything having to do with the conference that they're in. So, sure. So I think I'm starting to feel just a lot better about the conference as a whole, seeing the coaches that are coming in and all that, seeing Navy be added to the conference, seeing all the teams on the up and up and the investments that they're making in their program and their facilities, that we'll just have to be, we just have to win. Winning takes care of everything. And it doesn't matter what conference you're in, and then to kind of a secondary point, when we get to that point where we're winning in the American, would you rather be there or doing what Syracuse is doing right now, going like 1-11 in the ACC?
That is a tough question in that I would answer performing well in the American only because that would probably, in this stage, lead to an invite to a power conference. But I really do think that just in terms of the health of the program and the amount of money that it brings, the Power Five has got to be the goal for USF and UConn and teams of that ilk. Because we'll get into it later with Justin about Mike Oresco's vision for the Power Six. I'm sorry. But I think that what you said about winning being the cure-all is the really important thing here, because as USF and UConn fans, we don't want realignment to happen tomorrow. And the good thing that we have in our corner with that right now is that right now, the best realignment candidates suck. And I mean that passionately. I mean, Memphis was a co-champion last year, and no one before and I really want to take nothing away from Memphis. I mean, they had a fantastic year. Justin Fuente doing a fantastic job there. Really have nothing against that program. But no one ever would have put them even on the smallest bit of radar had they not had a wonderful year last year. Cincinnati, wonderful program, has been peaking for 7 years now. If someone's going to snatch up Cincinnati, they had a great shot to do so. I think Cincinnati could be very valuable to a power conference, but I really do believe that they've been banging at their ceiling for 7 years. I don't think USF and UConn are anywhere close to their ceilings, and I think that's something to be said for that. And I think that the fact that, however marginally, a team like USF or a team like UConn, or, I even could loop in UCF with this, but I won't because I don't want to. The fact that they're still on the radar, even though, they've been horrible at football. I mean, they haven't even been remotely okay at football. The last 3 years, they've been really, really bad. Yeah. And the fact that they are still in the conversation means that these teams have very, very high ceilings. And especially, I would argue that USF in football probably has a higher ceiling than UConn does, but I would argue that UConn's athletic department as a whole is on a level that USF can't even dream of being at right now. And really, those are two very, very valuable things. And I'm actually going to hopefully get something up on this before the season starts, but these programs have so many inherent pluses going for them that when they turn these ships around, which God knows when that will be, they are going to be really, really, really attractive to other conferences and much more attractive, at least right now. Program strength change over time, but right now they are much more attractive than a 9-win Memphis. If Memphis was the team that was going to help the Big 12, draw in more TV sets, they'd have snatched them up after this year. I don't think right now that team is out there. And perhaps they will be soon. We discussed before how going west for the Big 12 might not be a bad idea. We discussed how Cincinnati and UCF are both passable candidates. But the point is, there's no one standing out right now. For all we know, realignment is not happening tomorrow. That is going to give these teams enough time to turn things around and get themselves back to the top of the list. The only problem is they've got to actually do that, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you bring up about Memphis is that if the Big 12 wanted Memphis, they could have them. They could have, and to that point, they could also have Cincinnati in a matter of 2 seconds if that was what they wanted. So obviously something else is they have someone else in their eye, and that is a good point that the fact that UConn and USF are even in the conversation, given how unbelievably poor the football teams have been, definitely does speak to a larger value that they have beyond the the wins and losses from the past 2 years. Um, in that they've actually built something, and maybe also keeping an eye towards TV markets and stuff like that, and how uh, someone like Memphis is so clearly a second fiddle to Tennessee. Someone like Cincinnati, so clearly a second fiddle to um, Ohio State. In what are very small states geographically, whereas Connecticut offers the number 30, 32 TV market in the country, and then also gets you a big chunk of New York, which everyone cares about.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then when you take USF, like you said, it's owning the Tampa metro area, which I know is probably a big time Florida State country, but there's a lot of population to spread around in
Absolutely, yeah.
that area. So,
I mean, these are two teams that, as much as we can pick apart what's wrong with them right now, and there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot wrong, but they do have a lot of natural advantages going for them. And in the long term, that is really, really huge. I mean, you look at the old Big East, and look at those teams on paper, and you look at, Rutgers. I mean, on paper, Rutgers should be fantastic. They have the New York market. They were the birthplace of college football. They should be tremendous. Are they tremendous? No, but do they have enough going that with the proper resources there, they could be really good? Definitely.
yeah, they're
And
doing pretty well. Recruiting trail.
yeah, and I mean, like, obviously that athletic department, makes USFs look like a shining star. So, they're not going to be really good anytime in the near future. But there's something to be said for the just biological, so to speak, advantages that these schools have. And I almost feel like a bit of an asshole saying that and being like, oh, look, my school has more going than your school. And it's not even my school. So, there's a lot of problems with that. But the point is that I really do think that the future long term is bright for both of these programs. And as you were saying, I don't know if I'll ever be gung ho about the American. I really just don't know if I'll ever get there, no matter how long USF is in it. But it is not a bad holding pen in the meantime. It is a whole lot better than falling back to Conference USA, no matter what jokes people make about being back in Conference USA again.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all going to be, and we've talked about this a lot, but it's all just going to come down to this next AAC TV deal, and how much he can close, how much Oresco can close the gap. But for now, we'll just have to be content and try and work our way up. It's such a, for me as a UConn fan, everyone wants to say, oh, we got to get out of this conference, and we're finishing towards the bottom in football. Even in basketball, which is supposed to be our, that's our best sport, and it definitely is, but we finished, I think, 5th and 6th in the conference last year. So until you are blowing the pants off of this conference, it's not ever going to be a time where you can just say, oh my God, we don't belong here, especially when you consider that football is as important as it is. Our basketball program might as well be, no offense, USF's basketball program, or
No, it's a good point.
or even ECU's basketball program, because it doesn't matter. It was a non-factor, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we would have already gotten the call. So it's just kind of accepting that football runs the show and hoping that we can get there.
Yeah, absolutely. The point that I think you really nailed is that it's really, really hard to complain and say we don't belong here when we haven't shown anything like that on the field. And I can sit here and preach about why USF and why UConn deserve this, even without on-field success, and I will do that, and I probably will do that consistently. But winning's got to come first, and USF can be in the best market in the world, and if they go 4-8 every year, they're not going anywhere. You look at Tulane, like, oh my God, you'll have the New Orleans market. No one is saying that because Tulane hasn't been halfway decent in a decade.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a behemoth in that state,
True, exactly. And so, it's in the meantime, we just got to focus on the now, focus on the short term, and hope that these programs get turned around. And then we look at part two, I suppose.
Yeah. And so speaking of improvement, why don't we switch gears a little bit, and why don't you give me your number one candidate for a better than expected season in the American Athletic Conference?
That is a very good question. And I think that I'll give you a couple answers because one of my first candidate as my sleeper team in the American is we're going to touch on later with Justin because I think that Navy is going to surprise a lot of people. Beyond them, I think that I think that the top of the conferences, apart from maybe people underselling Navy a bit, I think those will mostly fall out how people are expecting. If we're looking a little deeper, I think people are underselling Tulsa a little bit. I think that they had a lot of big hires in the American this year with Tom Herman and Chad Morris. And Tulsa went out and got themselves a coach that fits the program well. Not a grand slam hire, but certainly a really good hire on paper. And they had enough weapons on offense last year that I can imagine them going and in the weaker of the two divisions with SMU and Tulane on the bottom, I can very easily imagine them getting a very soft 6-6 in their first year. And that would be a perfectly good spot for them. Now, is that the big sexy sleeper pick? Definitely not. I mean, they were horrendous last year. But I think one team out of that Tulsa, Tulane, SMU trio is going to have a really good shot to make a run at bowl eligibility in that West Division. And I would, if I had to put my chips on one of them, I'd pick Tulsa. Interesting.
If I had to pick an AAC West team, I might go with. I mean, there's a couple of good options, but among that trio that you named, what were those three? SMU,
Tulsa, and Tulane. That bottom three, no one's talking about.
I think I would take Tulane. I thought they were pretty solid last year, and I've seen them add some good players to their team. They had some transfers now eligible, but who knows? But my choice would honestly be Temple. The guys at Temple. They had a really good defense last year. They had a playmaking quarterback. They were just starting to put together their spread offense, which was interesting considering they had all these good running backs. And they returned all 11 starters from their defense last year, which is incredible from a defense that played really, really well. And
that was a great defense, absolutely.
Yeah, they're returning all 11 starters. And they're returning their quarterback. Like every team, it seems like in the mid-majors, they have some question marks on the offensive line.
Seriously, that's a great point.
Is that something the USF has, right? Question marks on the offensive line?
I mean, it's beyond question marks. It's like, I don't even know what's beyond a question mark, an upside-down question mark.
I think that's the mid-major plight is that we just can't put together an offensive line anymore.
Seriously.
Maybe a discussion for another day, but I mean, they have some question marks at offensive line, but they're returning a very talented dual threat quarterback. All of what was a very good defense last year. And I think, I think they have some opportunities out of conference to get some big wins, and then in the East they'll have their shot against, I don't know their exact schedule, but they'll have their shot against Cincinnati, East Carolina, and I think they could beat one or both of those teams. Especially someone like ECU. Did ECU finish second in the preseason? No, UCF did.
I believe it was UCF. People are pretty down.
Yeah, and
this year.
I could see them beating UCF too. Depending on where that game is and what goes down because of their defense. So that would be my choice for surprise team in the AAC. I know that as a Philly guy that may cut too close, but
oh yeah, it's tough for me. But I do like Temple. I think they've got a good program there, and Matt Rule, he really, he would be the guy that I would point to and say, that's how you do a 3-year rebuild. He inherited nothing, and he has slowly gotten to a point where, at least on paper, he should have a really, really competitive team this year who could go from bowl eligibility to a legitimate run at a conference title. And I have nothing but good things to say about Temple, despite my existential dread whenever I think about them, because I don't want to get into it again. But so with leaving a cliffhanger in that our formal American Athletic Conference preview will come very soon, why don't we take the opportunity now to bring on Justin to talk about media days and Navy and their potential impact in year one of their American Athletic Conference adventure.
Let's do it.